Have you ever been silenced in your own home? In the middle of dinner with the family gathered, my daughter-in-law turned to me, pointed her finger and said, without the slightest shame, "Shut up. This isn't for you." My son, sitting next to her, lowered his eyes, pretending not to hear. And I felt as if I'd shrunk in my chair. As if suddenly I were nothing more than an antique piece of furniture forgotten in the corner of the room. But what she didn't know, what no one there knew, was that that would be the last time anyone would dare treat me that way. Maybe you felt it too. That invisible weight of no longer being heard, of seeming inconvenient in the lives of those you sacrificed everything for. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. The truth is, I wasn't always this white-haired, slow-moving lady. There was a time when I was the beating heart of my home. I worked outside the home, took care of the kids, cooked dinner, handled bills, listened to people vent. I was the foundation. But the years passed, and with them came silence. Not the silence of peace, but the kind of silence that hurts. It's the silence of being ignored, of offering an opinion and hearing muffled giggles, of being interrupted with a, "That's none of your business anymore." Have you ever been through this? It's as if the wisdom of age is worthless, as if after 60 we become a burden, a nuisance, a reminder that time is passing. I've experienced this firsthand. And it hurts even more when it comes from within your own family, from those you raised with love, sacrifice, and dedication. At that dinner, when my daughter-in-law told me to shut up, I felt something break inside. Okay? But it wasn't sadness. It was a snap, a realization. Okay. In that moment, I remembered everything I'd left behind for that family. It's how I'd given up my career, how I'd invested money, time, health, only to be treated like an outcast, like someone who needed to be controlled. Real stories like mine happen every day. Strong women, wise grandmothers, being silenced by a generation that thinks respect is a thing of the past. But the law of return never fails, and sometimes what seems like the end is just the beginning. Stay with me, because what happened after that dinner changed everything. And maybe, just maybe, it will inspire you to never again accept being treated like an invisible person. I remember looking at my plate, trying to hide the shame, the lump in my throat, that chill you feel when you realize you're no longer welcome in a space you helped build. My granddaughter's look confused, curious stayed in my mind. Maybe she didn't even understand what was happening. But there, in the silence that followed my daughter-in-law's scream, I understood everything. I understood that the time had come to stop bowing my head. It's hard to put into words what goes on inside us when our own family silences us. But I know there are many people on the other side of the screen who have felt something similar. If any part of this story has ever revolted you or reminded you of something you experienced or heard, leave a comment below. Tell us what touched you most, what bothered you most. I read each message with an open heart because it is in this space that we find voice, strength, and acceptance. And if this story spoke to you, if it made you reflect like this video now, it's a simple but powerful gesture. Every like shows YouTube that this content matters. That these ignored voices like mine, like yours, deserve to be heard. And look, if you want to continue following real stories that move, provoke, and inspire, subscribe to the channel. This is where we transform pain into awareness, loneliness into community, silence into legacy. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with messages like this. And when more people listen, more respect blossoms. More empathy is born. And maybe fewer people will feel alone in their own homes. But this is still just the beginning. It's because that night, after everything that happened, I made a decision that no one expected. My name is Margaret. I'm 73 years old. I have 3 children and 2 grandchildren. My story, until recently, might have seemed similar to that of so many other grandmothers you might know. I wake up early, make my coffee slowly, and tidy the kitchen even when no one else has messed it up, just to pass the time. I like to cut fruit for those who don't always thank me. And I spent much of my life believing that being useful was the only way to remain loved. I was a wife for 41 years, a mother for a lifetime, and a grandmother. With all the love a tired but still beating heart can hold. I was always there behind the scenes. I never liked the spotlight. I was the one who prepared everything for the parties and watched from the sidelines with a discreet smile. The one who sewed costumes for her grandson on Halloween, who said it's okay even when she wasn't there. Because, for me, that's what love was: giving without demanding, loving without expecting anything in return. But today, I understand that even love has its limits when it always comes from only one direction. The truth is, I spent years hiding behind the role of the peaceful woman. I stopped traveling, turned down invitations, abandoned opportunities, all to be available, always. And you know what happens when you suppress yourself for so long? People start to believe you no longer have your own desires. That you no longer feel. That you've become a support system and not a whole person. But I am whole. I always have been. I just needed to remember that. For a long time, I carried a secret. A hidden truth I never shared. Not out of fear, but out of humility, 'cause I thought no one would care. I imagined my story of overcoming from way back, when everything was wilderness and necessity was no longer of interest to anyone. But that night at dinner, when I was humiliated, I realized the impact our story can have when it's told at the right time. When it stops being silent and becomes a revelation. I grew up in hard times. I started working at 14, doing laundry for others. I saved every penny. At 22, I opened a small grocery store with a partner. At 30, I bought my first piece of land. My husband never liked to mix my achievements with his. I never asked for them either. But I kept them. Every receipt, every deed, every detail of what I built with my own hands. It's because something inside me, that soft voice we tend to ignore, always said, "Don't forget who you are." This secret, kept for 4 decades, became my armor. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. It was identity. It was legacy. And as much as I lived as if I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, that night showed me that maybe it was time. Not to get revenge, but to show myself. Because when you don't assert yourself, the world puts you wherever it wants. Okay? And I was tired of being put in the corner. People think old age is the end of the journey. But sometimes it's the moment we finally allow ourselves to begin to be seen, to begin to be heard, to begin to be whole. I could have responded to my daughter-in-law's humiliation with more silence. I could have gone to sleep pretending nothing hurt. But that night, I opened the box. It's an old wooden box that held not only documents, but pieces of my story. Of the woman who existed long before I was called Grandma. Inside was the beginning of my turnaround. And no one could have imagined what was coming. If something in this story touched you, WRITE, the word here in the comments, invisible. Because sometimes all we need is to stop being dot. It was just another Sunday. It's those lunches we've had for years with the same tablecloth, the roast chicken, the barely touched salad. The table was full, laughter was loud, cell phones were everywhere. And there I was, amidst dishes and memories, trying to participate as best I could. I'd made a dessert my granddaughter loves, chopped the onion like my mother used to, and watched, as so often, life go by without really noticing me. Until someone mentioned a possible change in the house, a renovation, something like that. I offered my opinion quietly, as if I just wanted to help. I wouldn't touch that wall. The structure might not hold up. It was, at that moment, a sharp crack in the air. She turned to me, eyes cold, voice even colder. "Shut up. This isn't for you." As if I'd invaded forbidden territory. As if I didn't even have the right to speak. My breath caught. The fork slipped from my hand. The noise was minimal, but inside me it felt like thunder. My son, sitting next to her, lowered his eyes. He said nothing. He didn't defend me. Didn't even show any embarrassment. That was what hurt the most. In that moment, I understood it wasn't just about an unwelcome opinion. It was about everything that had accumulated over the past few years, the impatient looks when I tell an old story, the condescending smiles. When I forget a name, they'll let me do it, as said hurriedly, not with affection. The hidden truth behind each gesture is that, to them, I'm already outdated. I no longer belong at the center of the conversation. I'm only good for observation. And what struck me most wasn't the humiliation itself. It was how naturally it came, as if it were normal to silence a grandmother in front of her family, as if it were acceptable to turn the woman who once sewed her children's clothes, nursed their fevers, and held them together into a disposable figure. It made me angry, but it also gave me clarity. That pain, sharp, real, became a key. Something turned inside me. It was as if I suddenly saw my entire journey with new eyes. It wasn't about what they did to me anymore, but about what I let them do to me for so long, the silence I accepted, the small exclusions I ignored, the way I shrank, adapted, and erased myself. That wasn't just dinner, it was the trigger. The moment the truth I'd hidden for so long began to stir within me. Because when you're constantly diminished, there comes a time when dignity screams. And when it screams, there's no turning back. I finished my plate in silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was the silence of someone about to make a decision. A kind of calm that precedes a turning point. A silent preparation to show that no one has the right to silence a woman's entire story just because the gray hairs arrived first. And you know what's most ironic? While they talked about investments, inheritance, and taking control of the house, I watched them with a secret hidden in my heart. Something that could turn the whole situation upside down. A detail that, until that moment, no one had ever suspected. But there are things time cannot erase. There are decisions that remain hidden for decades, waiting only for the right moment to reveal themselves. And that night, I knew that moment was approaching. If you got here and felt this pain with me, write the phrase in the comments, "This is not normal." Because recognizing disrespect is the first step to breaking the cycle. I washed the dishes that night with trembling hands, but my head held steady as ever. Each dish I scrubbed felt like I was cleaning not only the mess from dinner, but also the remnants of my old attitude. The woman who had accepted everything silently was there, at the sink, for the last time. Because the silence that night had a different flavor. It wasn't resignation. It was decision. It was there, between warm water and soap, that I realized my story can no longer live folded inside an old box at the back of the closet. My journey, my behind the scenes, my sacrifices. All of this needs to see the light. Not for vanity, but for justice, for identity, for sanity too. I sat in my room and pulled out the wooden box. It's the same one I'd carefully guarded for years. Inside was the evidence of a lifetime no one ever wanted to know. Documents from when I was still writing checks in my own name. Photographs of the grocery store I'd built with my own hands before I even met my late husband. Receipts, notes, small personal victories never celebrated by anyone but me. It was as if each page said, "You existed. You went beyond the role they gave you." I leafed through it slowly, like someone rereading their own soul. And everything came back with an almost cruel clarity. The sleepless nights paying for my children's school fees, the days I hid my hunger so as not to worry anyone, the jobs I quietly accepted even after 60, just to make sure no one in the house would go hungry. All of this was erased over time, as if upon becoming a grandmother I had been automatically reprogrammed to never have. But no, I wasn't born old. I wasn't born invisible. I was young too. I was strong. I was my own person. And perhaps that's why, throughout my life, I learned to remain silent out of love. What I now realize was often fear disguised as sweetness. Fear of breaking the image of the perfect mother, the welcoming grandmother, the easygoing woman. But the truth is, the version that pleases everyone doesn't sustain anyone for long. That night, I made the most liberating decision of my life. Stop pleasing those who don't respect me. It's a silent but powerful transformation. A shift in mindset you can't see in the mirror but feel in your chest. I knew the revelation would come, and that when it did, it would make an impact. But I no longer cared about the scandal. I cared about the truth. And the right to be recognized for everything I'd done, not as a prize, but as part of my identity. The pain of humiliation became fuel. I began mentally assembling each piece of the conversation I needed to have. It wouldn't be yelling, nor revenge. It would be clarity. It would be redemption. Because when you spend your life giving your all and realize they only gave you crumbs back, there comes a time when even silence screams. And mine, that night, screamed dignity. I realized how many women like me remain silent every day. Wise, whole women who suppressed themselves for decades and now live as extras in their own homes. And that's why my story isn't just mine. It speaks of a generation that was taught to remain silent, but now is beginning to listen. As I packed everything back into the box, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. What I was about to do next would take courage, but it was necessary. I had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. And this time I was going to show myself completely with my past, my name, my legacy. If this part of my journey resonated with you, write the word dignity in the comments. Because it may take a while, but it always finds its way back. That night, after everything was washed, dried, and put away, I sat with the box on my lap and felt its true weight. It wasn't just ancient wood and weathered papers. It was my journey, compressed into silence for years. I opened it with the delicacy of someone about to touch an old wound, but with the firmness of someone who knows that, once exposed, the truth could no longer be ignored. The first item I found was a yellowed sheet of paper with well-defined creases. It was the contract for opening my first grocery store, signed in faded blue pen. I was 22 years old, courage in my chest, and no certainty other than the desire to not depend on anyone. I came from a simple childhood, the kind where you learn to do a lot with almost nothing. I learned early to understand the value of effort, and this shaped me in ways no one at that dinner table could have imagined. Then came the shopping receipts, invoices, the little credit notebook call kept as proof of an entrepreneurial mindset that was born long before that word became fashionable. With each page I unfolded, more memories came flooding back. The days I opened the store with the flu, the nights I organized inventory after putting the kids to bed, the feeling of putting food on the table with the sweat of my labor without asking anyone for anything. That wasn't pride, it was dignity, was structure. Soon after, I found old photos and then it hit me again. One in black and white, taken by a street photographer, showed my first bicycle bought outright, with money stashed in the lining of my purse for almost a year. Another, now in color, showed the opening day of the grocery store's second location. This one complete with a banner, soda on the sidewalk, and smiles on everyone's faces. And there in the center of the image was me, young, determined, never imagining that one day, decades later, I would be treated as if none of this had ever existed. This past that everyone seemed to ignore. Then that, for so long, I myself had kept hidden, now emerged as a collection of identity. It was more than paper. It was testimony. It was a legacy. As I examined each document and memento with teary eyes, a cascade of memories began to flood my mind. As if each piece of paper in that box were a key unlocking forgotten doors to my past. And these doors once opened, never close again. They reveal everything. What we were, what we endured, what we lost, and what others chose to forget. I remembered being promoted to store manager at a time when women in charge were rare. I was offered stability, a career path, and a promising future. But my son was only 3 years old and constantly sick. My oldest was showing signs of needing more attention at school. And my husband, well, he thought I should stay home. He said a woman's money doesn't support a man's house. So I resigned with a smile on my face and a suffocating tightness in my chest. I chose love and, with it, resignation. But resignation, when not acknowledged, becomes a wound. Years passed. I cared for my mother-in-law until the end as if she were my own mother. Baths, food, medicine company. She liked to call me daughter. I never did it out of obligation, but out of respect. She said that when she passed, she would leave something for me. She didn't, and that's okay, because I learned that some promises are born of affection but die in bureaucracy. The hurt, however, remained. Not because of the inheritance, but because no one mentioned my name when they divided up what was left. Then came the house. It's the house where I now live, in the back room, where I hear the hushed discussions in the kitchen, where I'm invited to express my opinion only when convenient. That house, which now bears their surname, had its down payment with part of my life savings. It was the money I'd saved for years in my retirement. Planned my 401k, saving penny by penny for everyone's safety. They needed it, and they said they'd reimburse me. But they never said anything more about it. The only thing that comes back, now and then, is the discomfort of having someone else in the house when they want privacy. These small stories, which added together become giants, were all there stuck to me like silent scars. Because sacrifice without recognition is like screaming underwater. No one hears, and yet you drown. But that night, as I looked back on everything, I realized something important. I was essential to all of their journeys. In every achievement, there was a piece of me. In every diploma left hanging, a sleep I lost. In every trip taken, an opportunity I turned down. I was the pillar no one saw. It's the foundation that supported them all without being named. And the hardest thing to accept isn't the silence of others, but how accustomed I've become to it. How, for fear of causing discomfort, I've diminished myself until I fit into a role never meant for me. I've been leaving aside my desires, my wishes, the small joys that remind us of who we are, all in the name of peace. But there's no peace where there's no respect. There's complacency, and that ... doesn't nourish any soul. There, alone with my memories, I felt I was experiencing the first step of my own transformation, a reunion with everything I was and, in some way, still am. Because no matter how much they try to erase it, the truth finds a way to emerge. My truth will no longer be folded and hidden inside any box. If these memories made you think about your own choices, write the phrase in the comments, "I also erased myself." Because recognizing this is the first step to rekindling everything that still beats inside you. But the most surprising thing was still at the bottom of the box. A thick brown envelope with my name handwritten on it. Inside it, what typical people would call it insurance or Plan B, deeds, contracts, an informal will, reviewed by a lawyer who was a friend of my youth. All in my name, all legalized. It's all ready. It was a silent decision I made many years ago at a time when I still believed that prevention was love. I kept it, hidden not out of distrust, but out of caution, out of responsibility. And somehow, as a reminder to myself that if one day my voice were stifled, my actions would still scream for me. Seeing it all together made me understand how much life is made of cycles, and how much appearances lie. Because on the outside, I'm just another grandmother with short steps and gray hair. But inside ... there still pulses the same strength of a woman who decided to write her own story. Even when the world said it wasn't her place, I closed the box. certain that the time had come. Not to throw anything in anyone's face, but to show who I am. Not with harsh words, nor with arguments, but with facts. With history. With truth. And there, in the silence of my room, I understood that the impact of a revelation is not in the volume with which it is said, but in this certainty with which it is shown. If you understand the value behind this silent preparation, write the word memory in the comments, because it holds the key to everything that shaped us. The moment wasn't planned, but it was necessary. There was no stage, no prepared audience. It was one of those Sundays where everyone was there out of obligation, each with a bored expression, and their cell phones in hand. The conversation revolved around bills, investments, how they were thinking of putting the house in their children's names to make the legal issues easier. And it was then, in that almost casual moment, I knew it was now. I got up from my chair unhurriedly. I went to my room, picked up the wooden box with steady hands, and came back. No one noticed at first. I kept hearing random phrases like, "We need to get this paperwork sorted out quickly, and you know the house is practically ours." I sat down. I placed the box on the table as calmly as someone offering coffee. But what I had there was something else. It was the hidden truth behind all the certainties they repeated. I opened the first envelope. I took out the deeds, the contracts, the purchase records, all legalized, with my name at the top of each page. Silence. An uncomfortable pause fell over the room. The kind of silence that carries tension and surprise at the same time. My eyes went straight to my son's face. My daughter-in-law didn't even blink. Only then did I speak, in the same voice they'd tried to silence that other night. "This house is in my name. And this business that supports you today, I started it. In 1983, when you hadn't even dreamed of stability." The room seemed to freeze in time. No one knew where to look. Some eyes widened, others filled with shame. My granddaughter lowered her phone. They stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, and perhaps they were, because for the first time I showed myself completely. Without the veil, without the nice grandma label, without the invisibility cloak I'd grown so accustomed to wearing. There I was, Margaret, the woman, the founder, the true owner of this entire structure. I didn't speak loudly. I didn't accuse. I just showed. I spoke the truth with the firmness of someone who no longer needed to demand respect. Because it was already there, imprinted on every page, in every line of my past. The words I used were unrehearsed. It came out clean, like a dammed river that finally finds an outlet. It was a turnaround without scandal, but it had an impact. It's an impact that doesn't shatter, it transforms. Because in that moment, they saw the woman who had held it all together silently. They saw the behind the scenes they had conveniently ignored. They saw the silent transformation of a presence that had always been there, but now occupied space. With dignity, my daughter. Law said nothing. She stood paralyzed. My son stammered an attempt at an explanation, but his voice faltered. And I, for the first time in many years, felt no fear, no hurt. I felt freedom. A freedom that didn't depend on approval. It was mine, period. There was no fighting, no tears. There was revelation, a turning of the page, a new beginning. Because sometimes all we need to do is lay the truth on the table literally and let it speak for itself. If you've ever experienced or witnessed a moment like this, when the truth turned the tide without you having to raise your voice, write in the comments the phrase, "I showed myself completely." Because there are times when that's worth more than any speech. After the words were spoken and the documents spread out on the table, no one quite knew what to do. The silence that had previously been used to silence me was now theirs, a disconcerted, almost childlike silence, as if they'd been caught by something they knew, deep down, they could no longer ignore. There was no shouting, no defense. It was impossible. The truth was there, naked, dated, signed. Concrete. My daughter-in-law was the first to cry. Not the loud, desperate cry, but a silent cry, flowing soundlessly, as if the tears were begging forgiveness for an arrogance that could no longer be hidden. She looked at me and tried to say something, but her words tangled together. Perhaps there really was nothing to say. When pride falls, it rarely has a word. My son took a little longer. He sat with his hands clasped together, eyes on the floor, like a boy being scolded by a teacher. After a while, he raised his head and said, "Mom, I'm sorry. That was all. That was enough." Because more than anything else, I needed to see that he recognized it. That for just a second, he understood the magnitude of what had been ignored for so long. But what really surprised me were my grandchildren. They didn't say anything, but there was something different in their eyes. It wasn't just surprise. It was admiration. It was as if for the first time they were seeing beyond the woman who makes pancakes and sews buttons. It was as if they were discovering a new version of me, stronger, more real, more whole. And maybe in that moment something inside them changed too. Seeing all this unfold before my eyes didn't bring me pleasure in the form of revenge. It wasn't about that. It was about justice. It was about finally being seen, not as a burden, but as the foundation of it all. It's the foundation of the house, of the history, of the family. It's a belated recognition. It's true, but transformative nonetheless. From then on, the dynamics began to change, albeit slowly. It's the way they called me to talk, the way they listened when I spoke, the attention that suddenly began to emerge in small gestures, a carefully arranged plate, a chair pulled out before I arrived, a sincere thank you. These weren't miracles, they were signs. It's that something had sunk in. It's that the impact of truth doesn't fade with time, it echoes. And I, who so often thought I was invisible, was now the center. Not because I wanted attention, but because I deserved respect. And this difference changes everything. Because when dignity is restored, even if late, we can breathe more deeply. The hurt doesn't disappear completely, but it settles. And in its place, a different kind of peace begins to emerge. It's peace that comes from recognition. I didn't need to raise my voice or lose my sweetness. The transformation came precisely from the silent firmness with which I shared my story. And, in the end, that was what touched each of them. Not the words, but the truth behind them. The life behind the documents. The woman behind the grandmother. And even if everything wasn't resolved overnight, something essential happened. They saw me. They really saw me. And once you're seen, no one can ignore you the same way again. If this part of the story reminded you of a time when you also needed to be firm to be respected, write the phrase in the comments, "I became visible." Because sometimes our presence needs to be reaffirmed, not with shouts, but with truths. After that day, things did change, but not in the way many imagine. The truth didn't come as a sweet medicine. It came as a cut, necessary, accurate, and sometimes lonely. Because when you stand up after spending your life bowing, not everyone around you knows how to deal with your new posture. Not everyone is ready for the woman who no longer asks permission to exist. For the first few days, I felt a strange calm, as if I'd finally shed a tight coat I'd worn for years. At the same time, an emptiness appeared. A new silence. Not the same silence as before, filled with veiled contempt, but the silence of someone now being taken seriously. And it's curious how this kind of respect, even if fair, can be accompanied by a certain distance. There were no more condescending jokes. No more attempts to correct my opinions with forced smiles. But also, at times, I noticed looks that carried caution. As if I had ceased to be that confident figure who endured everything. In silence, now, I was an unknown quantity. And that comes at a price. The truth is that becoming visible again after years of being invisible requires a new adaptation. For them, and for me too, I began to observe myself more. To reflect on how, for so long, I had been erasing the parts of myself that didn't fit the role of mother, grandmother, or guardian of harmony. I began to rediscover old tastes, forgotten songs, and dormant desires. Sometimes I'd put on a record I'd loved in my youth and sit alone on the porch. With a coffee, my heart a mix of relief and longing. I missed not only what I experienced, but also what I didn't experience. The decisions I made out of fear. Words I swallowed out of convenience. The versions of myself that never blossomed. It's strange to say this, but even with all the belated recognition, I still felt like I'd lost something. It was an affection that, in essence, still existed. It was position. It was role. What remained now was a new place, one I'd had to create myself. A space between the respect I'd earned and the tenderness that had somehow gotten lost along the way. Because when you say enough, when you stop accepting less than you deserve, some bonds fall apart. Not out of malice, but out of ineptitude. Not everyone knows how to love a woman who chose her own voice after so long being silenced. This is also part of the journey. And understanding this gave me maturity, a new mindset. I stopped expecting understanding from everyone. I started giving myself what I denied myself for so long. Consideration. Today I have peace. But I lost something in the process. I lost the comfort of being the one who pleases. I lost control over the image they had of me, but I gained something bigger. I gained myself now. I'm no longer quiet grandma. Now I'm Margaret. And that carries weight. A weight that isn't a burden, it's identity. And every strong identity carries a bit of loneliness. But it also carries freedom. The freedom to say yes and no. To be kind without being submissive. To love without disappearing. It's strange how sometimes the truth takes so long to surface that when it finally does, it arrives transformed. It's no longer just a revelation. It's liberation. It's a turning point. It's the kind of thing that, once done, can't be undone. It just evolves. If this feeling of reuniting with who you always were, but had forgotten, made sense to you, write the phrase in the comments, "Now I know who I am." Because finding this out even late changes everything. Those who sow love reap respect. Those who sow contempt ... reap silence. Never underestimate what an elderly person carries in their heart. Sometimes it's in the quietest heart that the most powerful story resides. If you've made it this far, it's because something about this journey truly touched you. And that says a lot about you. So leave your quote in the comments below. This message was for me, just so I know you were with me until the end. Your comment strengthens me and helps others find this kind of content. If you feel this video brought you something valuable, click the like button. It's just a simple gesture, but it makes a huge difference in keeping this conversation alive and reaching more hearts that perhaps need exactly that right now. And if this kind of story inspires you, represents you, or makes you reflect, subscribe to the channel. This space is made for people like us, those who have a past, who have pain, but also have the strength and wisdom to transform it all into learning. There's a video here to complement this conversation. Click and stay with me there. We still have a lot to share.